Hello friend and family, today's topic is we survive our plane crash. Let's begin. Come on buddy, keep it together, Dave murmured to himself, gripping the armrests tightly. The plane jolted again, and he glanced at the seatbelt sign, which had been on for what felt like hours. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Suddenly, the world outside the window was a blur of blue and white as the aircraft nosedived. The screams of his fellow passengers pierced his ears, drowning out the panicked announcements from the cockpit. His thoughts swirled, a tornado of memories and regrets, all leading to one stark realization. This was it. He'd never get to say goodbye to his wife and kids. The impact was like a giant fist punching through the hull of the plane. The force slammed Dave's head into the seat in front of him, and everything went dark. The world was a cacophony of tearing metal and rushing water, and he felt himself being pulled into the cold embrace of the sea. The bitterness of the salt water filled his mouth and nose, and his lungs screamed for air as he was dragged under by the weight of his own fear. When consciousness returned, Dave found himself floating in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the ocean. The wreckage of the plane scattered around him like a twisted metal graveyard. His life vest had automatically inflated, keeping his head above the churning waves. He coughed up seawater and gasped for breath, his heart hammering in his chest. The sound of splashing and distant cries filled the air, a grim reminder that he was not alone in this watery hell. Forcing his eyes open, he saw survivors clinging to the debris, their faces contorted with fear and shock. One by one, they began to spot the small island that had materialized on the horizon, a mere speck of hope in the overwhelming vastness. The current tugged at them, seemingly eager to carry them to the safety of solid ground. But the distance was deceptive, and the waves grew more relentless with each passing minute. Dave's thoughts swam with the names of his family, a silent mantra to keep his spirits afloat. He kicked his legs, trying to propel himself closer, his arms straining to keep his head high. The salt water stung his eyes, and his muscles burned, but he refused to let the ocean claim him. The shouts of the other survivors grew more frantic, echoing his own desperation. He could see the island now, lush and green, but still so far away. A piece of the plane's tail section bobbed nearby, a makeshift raft for the taking. He paddled over, pulling himself onto the jagged metal with trembling limbs. It was unsteady, but better than nothing. Two others, a young woman and a middle-aged man, had the same idea and clung to the opposite side. They exchanged weary nods, a silent agreement to stick together. The woman's eyes were red and swollen from crying, and the man's face was etched with lines of pain and determination. They took turns resting and paddling, each stroke a battle against the relentless waves. The sun blazed overhead, beating down on their soaked clothes and skin. The heat was a new enemy, sapping their strength as they inched closer to the island. Dave's thoughts drifted to his wife, Rachel, and their two kids. He could almost feel their warm embraces, but the cold reality of the water kept pulling him back. The horizon wavered, playing tricks with his vision, making the island seem to recede and grow nearer by turns. The woman, Linda, spoke up, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "I think we're getting closer." Her words brought a renewed surge of hope and effort to their weary limbs. The man, Tom, nodded, his grip on the raft tightening. "We can do this," he said, his teeth clenched. The journey to the island was a grueling marathon. Each wave was a hurdle to overcome, each crest a victory in itself. The salt water stung their eyes and the sun burned their skin. But they didn't stop. The island grew larger with each stroke, the promise of land a beacon guiding them through the tumultuous sea. The water was filled with debris, from seat cushions to luggage, remnants of their shattered lives, bobbing alongside them like macabre companions. As they approached the shoreline, the waves grew more fierce, crashing against the island's rocky embrace. The sound of the surf was deafening, and the spray stung their faces like 1,000 needles. The three of them braced themselves for the final push, their muscles screaming for rest. They could see the beach now, a strip of golden sand that looked like paradise after the endless blue. The raft slammed into the rocks with a jarring crunch. The force sent Dave tumbling into the frothy water, his body bruised and battered. He surfaced, gulping for air, and saw Linda and Tom had made it too. They grabbed onto the jagged stones, fighting against the waves that tried to drag them back out to sea. Together, they clawed their way onto the shore, collapsing onto the sand with a collective sigh of relief. The island was beautiful, a stark contrast to the horror they had just endured. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the air was thick with the scent of tropical flowers. But the beauty was marred by the harsh reality of their situation. They were shipwrecked, with no idea where they were or how they would be found. They lay there for a moment, the thunderous waves pounding the shore, a grim reminder of their plight. Dave forced himself to stand, his legs wobbly after hours in the water. He looked around, his gaze settling on the others. Linda was on her hands and knees, vomiting up seawater, while Tom sat, staring blankly at the horizon. "We need to get to higher ground," he said, his voice hoarse. "We can't stay here." They stumbled up the beach, leaving the raucous waves behind. The sand was hot underfoot, burning through the wet fabric of their shoes. As they reached the tree line, they saw more survivors staggering out of the jungle, some with injuries that made Dave's bruises seem insignificant. They gathered in a clearing, a ragtag group of 10, each clinging to life by the barest of threads. The first order of business was to assess their injuries and inventory their supplies. Most had lost everything but the clothes on their backs. A few had managed to grab their phones, but the waterlogged devices offered no comfort, no connection to the outside world. The realization hit them like a second wave. They were truly stranded. Dave's mind raced with the knowledge that Rachel and the kids would be worried sick. He had to find a way to signal for help, to let them know he was alive. Looking around, he noticed the tail section of the plane had washed up further down the beach, a stark reminder of the lives lost. The metallic frame glinted in the sun, an idea forming in his desperate mind. "We can use the plane wreckage to build a signal fire," he suggested to the group, his voice firm despite the tremor of fatigue. The survivors nodded in unison, understanding the urgency. They gathered what dry wood and palm fronds they could find, forming a pile next to the wreck. Using a piece of sharpened metal from the plane, they worked together to create sparks that danced on the dry kindling. After several attempts, the fire roared to life, a beacon of hope against the encroaching nightfall. The heat was a welcome warmth against their chilled skin, and the smoke curled upwards, a silent plea to the heavens. As the flames grew, so did their spirits. They shared their names and stories, finding solace in their shared ordeal. Among them was a doctor, an engineer, and a marine biologist, each bringing unique skills that could be vital for their survival. They decided to form a leadership trio, with Dave, as the most level-headed and physically capable, taking the lead. The first night on the island was a restless one, filled with the cries of unidentifiable creatures and the constant roar of the ocean. They took turns keeping watch, the fire casting flickering shadows across their drawn faces. The fear of the unknown was palpable, but they found comfort in each other's presence. The following day, Dave rallied the group to explore the island. They had to find water, food, and shelter. The doctor, Dr. Castillo, tended to the injured, her medical training invaluable in their dire situation. The engineer, Mark, and the marine biologist, Laura, offered their expertise in construction and navigation. They ventured into the dense jungle, hacking through vines and brush with makeshift machetes fashioned from the plane's debris. The vegetation was rich and untouched, a stark reminder of the world's indifference to their plight. The air was thick with humidity, making every step feel like wading through a sauna. The sounds of unseen creatures rustled the foliage, a symphony of survival that played out around them. After hours of searching, they discovered a freshwater stream, its clear water a gift from the heavens. They drank greedily, the sweet liquid washing away the salt from their mouths and reviving their parched throats. Laura identified edible plants and pointed out potential sources of protein, her knowledge a lifeline in this new, unforgiving environment. They returned to the beach, their spirits slightly buoyed by the promise of sustenance. Dave, Mark, and Laura discussed constructing a more permanent shelter using the wreckage and palm branches. The group split into teams, each tasked with gathering materials while keeping an eye out for any sign of civilization or rescue. As the day waned, the survivors gathered around the signal fire, sharing their meager rations of coconuts and fish that Laura had taught them to catch. The flames cast a warm glow on their faces, painting a picture of unity amidst the chaos. They talked of their families, their lives before the crash, and their hopes for the future. The conversation was a balm for their souls, a reminder that they weren't alone in this ordeal. The next morning, Dave led a group to search for more substantial building materials. The jungle was dense, the foliage thick and unyielding. They hacked away at the underbrush with their makeshift tools, the sweat pouring down their faces like rain. They found large bamboo stalks and sturdy branches, enough to construct a shelter that would withstand the elements. The work was grueling, but the promise of a dry place to sleep pushed them forward. Back at the camp, Mark and Linda had made progress on the shelter. They had managed to prop up the sturdy bamboo, weaving palm leaves between the poles to create a watertight roof. The others had gathered more food, including a clutch of eggs from a wild bird's nest, which they roasted over the fire. The smell of cooking meat and fish filled the air, making their stomachs growl in anticipation. As they worked, a shrill cry pierced the air, sending a shiver down their spines. They looked up to see a flock of seagulls, their wings glinting in the sun, flying in a tight formation towards the horizon. It was the first sign of life from the skies since the crash. The sight filled them with a glimmer of hope that perhaps a search party had been dispatched. They paused in their work to watch the birds, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Maybe they'll see the fire," Linda whispered, her voice trembling. Dave nodded, his eyes never leaving the retreating birds. "We've got to keep the fire going, no matter what." The days on the island blurred together in a blend of hard work and fearful anticipation. They built shelters, fished, and foraged for food, each task a battle against the island's wildness. Dr. Castillo set up a makeshift medical station, tending to the injured and sick with whatever supplies they could salvage. Laura's knowledge of the island's flora and fauna became their lifeblood, guiding them to safe food and water sources. As the days stretched into a week, the survivors grew more adept at their new lives. They learned to predict the weather by the rustle of the palm leaves and the color of the sky. They grew stronger, their bodies adapting to the constant physical exertion. But the fire remained their most critical beacon of hope. Each night, they took turns adding fuel to the flames, willing it to grow brighter, to reach further into the vast unknown. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, a faint drone reached their ears. They froze, straining to hear over the rhythmic crash of the waves. The noise grew louder, and soon they could make out the unmistakable sound of a helicopter. Adrenaline surged through their veins as they rushed to the beach, waving their arms frantically. The helicopter grew closer, and they could see the rescue team peering down at them. The feeling was indescribable, a mix of relief and joy so profound it brought tears to their eyes. The helicopter hovered above the clearing, dropping a rope ladder. They climbed up one by one, the wind whipping their hair and clothes, their hearts racing with excitement. As Dave ascended, he couldn't help but look back at the island, now a speck of green in the vast ocean. It had been both a prison and a sanctuary, a place that had tested them to their limits and brought out their true strengths. Thank you for your time. God bless.